Hello, how's it going? In this video we're going to set up a Makefile for an OpenGL project. This will be pretty minimal but surprisingly effective. So strap in and let's get into it. Okay, so here I've got a really simple OpenGL project. This is the result of the first video in my C++ OpenGL series. It's really simple. See if this works. Here's what we've got. We're going to build this. It's going to make a colored screen. All of the source code has been written, but let's say that we don't have this and we want to build this project. Well, first thing we're going to need to do is set up our environment. This will just take a second. All right, so I just got this all opened up, ready to go. Here we've got the CMake file from previous installations. What I'm going to do is just open up my file tree, M to modify, A to add a new file, and this is going to be Makefile. We can just go ahead and edit that, and I'll just pop over. So here we've got our source files, and what I want to do is I want to automate this a little bit so that my make system will sort of look through all of these files and compute which things, if any, need to be recompiled. Like here I've got a C file, a C++ file. These are two independent translation units. Now my main.cpp is including config, but if I modify the config header alone, it's not necessarily going to cause a recompilation in the make. So we'll talk about that. But I'm just going to set up a few variables. So I'm going to set, why can I not type? I'm just going to set my C++ compiler to G++ and use GCC for my C compiler. And then I'm going to specify which directory includes my source files. So in future, if I add a subdirectory in here with more source files, the only thing I'll need to modify is this source directory's variable, and that'll take it into account. Then I've got a few actions, they're going to be components of the compiler flags or the linker flags right at the end. One of those is to include the dependencies folder. So if we just go over, if we just go over and look inside here, this dependencies has all of these things which will be useful for us. So I'm going to have an action to include that folder. I'm using the dash capital I to include, and then the dependencies folder. And I'm also going to include the library folder, and that is dependencies lib. Now in addition, I'm going to have a number of options, and I'm getting these from good old trusty Learn OpenGL. So this is just down in creating a window. We have a bit of IDE info, and then this stuff here. So these flags here are the ones that I'm including. Transparency. That's pretty cool. Right. Okay, so with those actions set up, I can then go ahead and set up my flags. So my flags will be, I want, all warnings with some extra warnings. If we want, we can do some optimization, like optimization level 2 or something, and then we'll include those extra actions there. So we'll include the dependency folder, and then we'll include the library folder, and then we'll put in those linker flags or linker options even. Cool, so we've used these variables to build up the collection. Now I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna hard code this for now, just make sure the thing works, and then I'm gonna do something a little bit more sophisticated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to make a GLAD object file, and that GLAD object file will depend on my GLAD C file. And the rule for that is going to be invoking my C compiler, bringing in those flags, and then I'm going to use a special variable here in CMake. And what this variable does, we have here sort of, you can think of it like the target and the dependencies to build that target. And what this variable does is it pulls down the dependencies. It could be one, there could be more than one, it pulls them down. So this is the input files to the compiler, and I want to put C as a flag to just compile, not compile and link, because I want to output that object file basically. And then I'm going to use this other special variable, which is the target of the rule. So when we go through and do this, the make system will say, okay, so we want to make this object file, GLAD object. It depends on this source file. We'll invoke the compiler, bringing that in and outputting that. Okay. Then I'm going to have my main object, and my main object will depend on main CPP, and we're going to invoke the CPP CPP compiler, same set of flags, and just the same stuff as before. Right, so this will build these two translation units as these linkable object files, but then we're going to need to bring them together. So I'm going to have the target named project, and this will depend on the GLAD object file and the main object file. And then the rule to build that is I'm going to just invoke my C++ compiler. Well, I guess they're compiling to the same, linkable formats, so it doesn't really matter which compiler we use at this point, but yeah, there we have it. We're going to pull down both of those object files, and we're going to output it into the project file. So then there are two more things I'm going to put in. I'm going to put in sort of a make all option, which is just going to make the project and then attempt to run the project. And I'm also going to put in a clean option, which will remove recursively all of the object files. So that's, oh yeah, there's something I missed. Okay, so just realized I'm going to need to change these just a little bit. That should be fine. So I'll just go ahead and write this, and then I'll attempt to make it. Okay, so we're going along and we're building this, and it's just come up with a linking error. It said, hey, you've told me to link the GLFW3 library, but we don't have it. So here's what I'm going to do. Just for funsies, I'm going to go and build the GLFW3 library. Alrighty, so I'll just grab that code from the GitHub repo. NeoFetch died. Oh my goodness, okay. It really died. Cool, so I'm just in there, and I'll pop into that directory where I just cloned everything, and then I'll just go to the compilation guide. Alrighty, so in the compilation guide they have a bunch of dependencies, but I've installed these ahead of time, so it's all good. But I'm going to need to sort of generate with CMake and then build them. So what I'll do is I will make a build directory. We can see it there, that's good. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go, alright, I'm going to run CMake. The source will be the current directory. the build directory will be build, and then I'm going to define the option that I want to build shared libraries, just like that, fingers crossed. Okay, so this has gone ahead and it's generated it, so I'll just change into the build directory, have a look in there, and we can see that everything's made. Because I'm on Linux, the generator was a Makefile. So then I can just go up here and just run make. And this will take a second, it'll just go through and make everything. Okay, great. So once everything's made, we can just close this down, and I'll just go into where I built this. And then there's in here build, and then source, and I can see here I've got these shared library objects. So it's a little strange, but yeah, we can go ahead and grab these and just go put them in the library folder. So we should be looking for them. Okay, and just to be sure, I'll go ahead and grab the headers from the include and go ahead and replace what's there. It's the same stuff, but it's all part of the fun. What I can do is I can try this again, and it's still saying that it can't find it. So in the case where we are pretty sure we got the library in the right place, but it just can't find it, something we can do, if you look here, it says that it's running user binary LD loader to find that library. So what we can do is we can say, okay, I'm going to run the loader. I'm going to tell it to load glfw3 and be verbose. Oh, awesome. So what it's done is it's gone through and it's shown me, hey, these are all the things that we're trying to load in. And what I'm looking for is, well, it's not going to give really super useful input for my project, but specifically like what it's looking for. So I can see here that it's looking for libglfw3.so and libglfw3.a. It's a static or a shared library, and it will accept either of those, but that's not what I've got. So if I look over, I've just got libglfw, not glfw3. So I guess the options are either rename the library or change the option, and I'm going to change the option. So I'll just go over and change that. Let's give this a go. So we'll go make all, and it makes it. Awesome. So that's super cool, but I want to work at making this a little more powerful. So one thing we can do is if we go over, note that our main file is just depending on main CPP, even though it should really be, well, like I said, it's including config, but it's not modifying if config changes. So for instance, if I just go down and include something, just do some trivial change, and then I make everything, then the Makefile doesn't really register that something's changed, and I don't want to do that. So what I can do is I can just go down, and here I can specify that in addition to this, I also want to be monitoring the header file. So now when I attempt to make, it says, hey, you've changed the header file. So let's go ahead and give an error. Oh my goodness. Okay, look, something funky. I don't 100% understand it. It's getting some really weird messages, but that's besides the point, because although we could list these header files, it would be better to be a little more sophisticated about how this stuff works. And even not even worrying about that, we can definitely clear this stuff up quite a bit. So what I'm going to do, I've got this source directories. I'm going to start looking through those source directories and sniffing out the files basically. So I'm going to make a variable called source files. Just like that, and we can go ahead and run this, and we're printing out the set of source files. So what this is doing is it's looking inside the src, the source directory. It's picking out any C or C++ files. If we had many of these, they would all be coming in. But then the question is, okay, well, can we make it such that instead of hard coding this and looking through the src directory, we can look through a whole set of directories? And we can in Make using a loop. Okay, so the construct here is for each. We have the variable name and then the set that we're drawing from. So in this case, it's the source directories. And then we're going to have the operation that we're performing. So yeah, hopefully, yeah, we're getting the same. But then the next thing I'd like to do is I would like to pick out the object files, the corresponding object file names. So there's another CMake, I keep mixing those up, they're very similar. Another Makefile construct we can use here, which is pattern substitution. And what I'll do is I'll go through this and I'll say, okay, well, let's take in any sort of C++ file and swap that out with the same thing but an object file. And then the next thing we'll put in here is the set that we're applying that filter to, which is those source files. So we can then go ahead and print out those objects. Okay, it should be a comma. Okay, give that a shot. Okay, cool. So you can see we sort of sniffed through, we found the source files, and then this filter has swapped out the C++ file. And you can probably guess what I'm going to do next, and that is I'm going to apply a second filter. So as the input here, I'll apply another pattern substitution. And now I've got my everything's object files. Cool. So that's looking pretty good. And now I'm going to reduce this to 2 rules. No matter how many files I have, I'm just going to have 2 rules. And the way this is working is I'm basically going to say, hey, if you're trying to make an object file and you can make it with a C file, then this is how you do it. And then similarly, if you're trying to make an object file and that rule can be satisfied with a C++ file, then you can go ahead and do it. And the reason these are not going to get crossed up is because I've got a glad.c, but I don't have a glad.cpp, if that makes sense. The file names are unique. And so the object file can always, hopefully, always find a file to satisfy it, so it can find an appropriate rule. And then we can go a little bit better. We can go down to the project, and instead of hard coding this, we can say, hey, we've got this set of object files, depend on that, basically. So hey, if you want to make the project, all the things in this set must be built. So just go ahead, clean it, that looks pretty good, and then I'll go ahead and make it, and yeah, that is looking awesome. But we still haven't solved the problem. Like, we've automated it, this is really cool, but if I go over and again I go and modify this and make some other change, then I try to rebuild and it doesn't register that anything has changed, which is potentially a problem. I mean, you can always fix this by periodically cleaning, but that's not really acceptable. So here's how we can here's how we can fix this. Makefiles, or at least the new compiler, that's a silent G, by the way, that's how language works, but the new compiler can create dependencies based on sniffing around the files themselves. So I'm going to make a new variable called dependencies. And pretty similar to before, I'm going to apply a pattern substitution. I'm going to take an object file and swap it out for a D file. That's a dependency file. So I'm going to apply that filter to my set of objects. Then what I'll do is I will tell make to include all of those dependencies. Actually, I'll leave that, yeah, we'll have a bit of fun. I'll lengthen this out a little bit. So we won't include them just yet, but I'll just show how we can make them. So if I just go over to the linker options, maybe down here, okay. There are some options I can put in for the compiler, and that is this MP and MD options. And what they will do is, as they're working on these files, they'll sniff around and generate the dependencies for those files. So we can go, let me just clean. Okay, so just notice that this takes a little bit of time, and then if we go back to our file, to refresh, we can see that in addition to these object files, we've generated these dependence files. So we can go ahead and just clear this out. Open these up, and these are all of the things which this depends on. So if any of these things change, then some recompilation is going to need to happen. But as you can see, these are standard libraries. I don't think these are going to change. But if we go over and we look at the dependencies for the main file, right up the top, we've got all this stuff which is local to our project, including this config header. So now the config header is in there. It's been registered as a project dependency. So in theory, we should be able to go in here and modify this, and then if we go make all, it should say, hey, you've modified that header, but it hasn't picked that up. And that's what I was getting at before when I said we need to include the dependencies. So we'll just go back and yeah, include them. So like I said, I just made that and changed the header and it didn't register it. But now if I go and attempt to make it again, oh my goodness. Oh yeah, whoops, over here, you can see I'm using this carrot top. And like I was saying, this carrot top will bring down the dependencies of the rule directly. But we can indirect this a little bit more and use this other carrot top. And what this other carrot top will do is it will sniff around and look at the dependencies of the source files which the object depends on. I hope that makes sense. But in other words, it will just bring in, it'll actually look at these files. So now if I go make all, oh my goodness. Okay, there's two things I spotted. And that is, making these videos is always fun. Right, so that is that I've currently hard-coded this, and it works because I've only got one directory that I'm really interested in, but I should, it's making me nervous now. Why is it coming up green? Okay, and the other thing is here, it's just looking for, it's not inserting the variable. That should now be working. So the reason this looked like it was working is the compiler flag will generate those dependency files. That's why they were being created, but this variable was not being set correctly, so it wasn't actually looking for those things. But fingers crossed. Okay, so we make all. Uh-oh, that's really not good. Ah, same issue. One day I'll get it. Alright, cool. So I've just done a fresh build, and what I can do is I can go back in, please work, modify this file, right? A pretty innocuous modification. And then if I go and make again, thank goodness. Okay, it registered that the header file changed and needed to be recompiled. And this is, let me just give this a little more space to see all of this. Okay, so it was pretty smart. It worked out that the main object file, the main CPP, all of that, depends on the config header, and the project, of course, one of the dependencies is on that main object file. So it picked out just the bits which needed to be recompiled, and yeah, I'm happy with that. So there we have it. This has just been a little talk about Makefiles, because they're fun. I mean, the thing I like about Makefiles is when you're using an IDE, so much of it gets taken out of your hands, but I think it's cool to see how things are actually working. There we have it. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and yeah, all the best, and I'll see you again at some point. Bye.